Hello everyone. Welcome to Hollywood Recaps. Today we will be watching a summarized version of a sci-fi adventure film from 2007 called Sunshine. Beware of the spoilers ahead. So, sit back, relax and let's begin. In the year 2050, dark energy is destabilizing the sun, threatening all life on Earth with a new ice age. A faded and weak glowing sun appears from the sky. Dr. Robert Capa starts to explain his story of how the sun is dying.
Mankind faces extinction, and 7 years ago the Icarus I, a prototype spacecraft with advanced heat shielding and a sophisticated artificial intelligence, AI, is set on a mission to restart the sun.
But unfortunately, the mission failed. 16 months later, Robert Capa and a crew of 7 decided to leave Earth in frozen winter. Scientists conclude that an experimental stellar bomb payload, with a mass equivalent to Manhattan Island, will flush out the infection and restabilize the sun. The team's purpose is to create a star within a star. 7 years later, a second attempt is made with the Icarus II. We are taken onto the spaceship where we meet Dr. Searle. The ship's counselor and the medical officer is staring at a very weak star. He asks Icarus II to show him what the sun would look like at full percentage, but the android tells him that if she did, the sun would burn out his retinas. Dr. Searle places a filter over the window of the spacecraft in order to allow him a 3.1% view. The sun switches up by one notch, almost blinding the doctor. It lasts for 30 seconds. Dr. Searle has become fascinated at looking out from the ship's viewport at the approaching sun and is curious what it would be like to experience the unfiltered view. The result has some kind of effect on Searle, who begins to spend many hours in the viewing room, repeating his exposures to the sun so often that his skin eventually peels away and sores cover his face. A discussion over the table occurs where we are introduced to the rest of the crew. Captain Kaneda explains that after 16 months of travel, as the ship nears the sun, solar noise is known as the dead zone will begin to interfere with radio communications to Earth. As they are miles and miles away, all communication back home will be lost. As the ship encountered the dead zone 7 days earlier than expected, the crew is now left with just 24 hours to collect all of their individual thoughts and send each of them off to their loved ones in a last message packet. We see Corazon, the botanist who maintains the oxygen garden that provides both food and carbon to the atmosphere recycling during the trip, digging up some vegetables inside. Dr. Robert Capa has difficulty in finding his words and makes several different attempts at his message. After he finally sends it off, we are transported back into Dr. Searle's office where we find Captain Kaneda fixated on the sun at its mere 3% in strength. Corazon enters and tells Icarus II to switch the sun filter down. Corazon notes that while the ship is only about 2/3 of the way to its destination, the sun, the garden, has been producing oxygen at better than expected rates. The ship already has enough oxygen stored up for the delivery, and a quarter of the return trip. A fight breaks out between Dr. Robert Capa and Mace, the engineer who leads a military perspective to the mission. Dr. Robert Capa unintentionally ran out the clock on the message system, which meant that Mace could not record his message to his family. Tension lingers as open animosity between the two rises, despite Mace's apology. Dr. Searle has Mace spend a couple of hours in the Earth room, which simulates sensual experiences on Earth. Afterward, Mace apologizes to Dr. Robert Capa and they become civil toward each other. Captain Kaneda has been researching the video logs of Captain Pinbacker, the commander of Icarus I, in an attempt to discover why the original mission failed, and thereby prevent his crew from making the same errors. He plays one video where Pinbacker describes a small meteor storm that did superficial damage, and is puzzled by Pinbacker's aloof reaction to the event. The crew joins together to witness Mercury pass by the sun, showing how powerful the sun really is in size. As the ship approaches Mercury, Harvey, the first officer, and the communications specialist pick up a signal from the Icarus I's distress beacon, only hearing the faint signal because it was amplified by the iron in Mercury's mass. Emphasizing that some of those aboard Icarus I could still be alive, Captain Kaneda explains this point to the crew, and begins a discussion as to whether the current mission should be altered in order to check on the Icarus I's distress beacon. Mace is not happy with the choice to divert from their flight path because their mission to deliver the bomb has the utmost priority. Dr. Searle says that he agrees with Mace's assessment, but adds that diverting to the Icarus I could possibly add a second payload, bomb. He argues that since the Icarus bombs have never existed before and therefore have never been actually detonated either, their existence is entirely theoretical and having two could be advantageous if something went wrong with the first one. There is further heated discussion, which Captain Kaneda finally stops by saying he is handing the decision to the ship's most informed person in these matters, their nuclear physicist, Dr. Robert Capa. Dr. Robert Capa is troubled by being asked to make this decision. He explains to the captain that he simply doesn't have enough information to make an informed and rational decision, and the best he can do is to flip a coin. When Captain Kaneda asks so, heads or tails? Coppa replies, "Heads, 2 last best chances are better than 1. Dr. Robert Coppa's decision is finalized by the captain. Both Icarus crafts will rendezvous together. Trey, the tech-savvy navigator, plots the course, checks it 3 separate times, and is satisfied he has been accurate. Trey shifts the Icarus II's course to intercept Icarus I. In the many calculations, Trey misses one: the need to readjust the heat shield that protects the ship from the sun's radiation. This error is discovered when there is an emergency declared by the computer after slight damage to the heat shield results from Trey's mistake. The crew rush to find out what had occurred. Trey tries to explain himself and tells the team that he messed up due to stress. The team decided that the true extent of the damage can only be assessed and repaired by leaving the ship and working directly in space. Captain Kaneda asks for a volunteer to accompany him and, after refusing to allow the second-in-command to join him, Dr. Robert Coppa is volunteered by Mace. Nevertheless, Dr. Robert Coppa accepts the implicit challenge, and Captain Kaneda agrees to let him accompany him on the spacewalk. As Captain Kaneda and Dr. Robert Coppa exit the ship in suits to begin repairs, Cassie, the pilot who serves as the crew's emotional tether, moves the Icarus II's position so as to provide the 2 spacewalking astronauts as much shade as she can. She does this knowing it will result in the loss of the 2 communications towers needed to return to Earth later. The tips of the comm towers burn up as they continue to revolve around the living quarters, in and out of the sunlight. Consequently, Cassie unwittingly sets off another chain of events, when the still revolving and burning remnants of the communications tower cause a beam of sunlight to deflect towards the center of the ship and onto the oxygen garden. A fire breaks out that initially the ship copes with, but soon it flashes out of control and threatens not only the garden, but the entire ship itself. Corazon rushes to her rapidly burning garden. During this event, Icarus II begins to take automatic control of the ship, in order to return the heat shield back to cover the living quarters as continued exposure threatens the mission, which due to Cassie is now protecting the 2 astronauts from being vaporized by mere direct exposure to the sun. Cassie realizes that this maneuver will result in the death of the 2 spacewalkers and she tries to countermand the order, but the ship's intelligence refuses to be ignored. Cassie and the AI fight over control for a few moments, with Cassie eventually using an override command that needs to be authorized by a second crew member. Cassie turns to Mace to have him say his authorization code, but he refuses. He believes the mission far outweighs the loss of Captain Kaneda and Dr. Robert Coppa. Cassie pleads with Harvey, who immediately issues his authorization. Silently disagreeing, Mace directly calls Captain Kaneda and asks him to support him, countermanding the orders issued by Cassie and Harvey, a decision that will result in his own death and of Dr. Robert Coppa. Captain Kaneda agrees with Mace that the mission is more important than his and Dr. Robert Coppa's life, and the captain tells the AI to resume corrective shading and proceed with the mission, which it does. Corazon requests entry, thinking she can save it, but Mace, weighing up the situation quickly, realizes that the mission and ship will be lost unless drastic action is taken, so he orders the computer to release all the stored oxygen in the tanks, to provide such an enormous boost to the fire that it will literally blow itself out. However, knowing too that this will completely destroy the garden. As the cover for the 2 astronauts is diminished, Captain Kaneda orders Dr. Robert Coppa to go back to the ship as he patches the last of the heat shield damage by himself. Dr. Robert Coppa complies, and shortly after Captain Kaneda fixes the remaining damage, and then meets his demise with exposure to the sun. Captain Kaneda is taken by the wave of fire. Because of the loss of their oxygen garden, the astronauts now have no choice but to intercept Icarus I. Trey still blames himself and is put on suicide watch. Now alongside Icarus I, Dr. Searle, Dr. Robert Coppa, Mace, and Harvey board to discover that there is enough food to last, a flourishing oxygen garden and a workable payload. Corazon calculates how much oxygen they have and how much they need to complete the mission. She concludes there is enough for 4 of the 5 of them to live to deliver the payload. Dr. Searle is seen staring out of the window once more in the blazing light of the sun. His skin is peeling back even more. The crew prepares to head out to explore the Icarus I. On arrival, the small investigating crew find an old spacesuit and that the entire area is packed with dust. They decide to split up and search for anything still on board, as well as why the signal is still coming from the old ship. They discover that the entire vegetable garden is still alive and growing strong, an entire ecosystem in their hands. Mace discovers that there has been extensive damage to the ship's computer servers, which will not allow the ship to move. There is food and water but no crew. A video log from Pinbacker, now sporting signs of disfigurement, suggests that the crew chose to scrub the mission, believing that humanity's impending destruction was God's will. Additionally, all crew members are found burned to death in the viewing room, the result of the filter having been turned off. The comment is made that if the Icarus I were not behind the shield of Icarus II, those seeing the burned crew members would suffer the same fate. While the crew is investigating, The airlock connecting the Icarus I to the Icarus II is mysteriously destroyed and both ships are pulled apart. They find one dusty suit that would let Dr. Robert Capa go back, as he is the only one able to deploy the payload to Icarus II. Harvey disputes Dr. Robert Capa being given the suit because of his status as captain following Kaneda's death. Dr. Searle stays to manually open the shafts while Harvey and Mace use the insulation of the ship to cover themselves so they can hold on to Dr. Robert Capa as he is shot towards the Icarus II and make it in themselves. During the actual trip, Dr. Robert Capa loses his grip on Harvey, who drifts off into outer space and is frozen. His body can be seen breaking apart when it collides with the ship and burning up when his corpse leaves the protection of the heat shield. Mace suffers frostbite but lives and rapidly recovers. As Icarus II leaves, drive, Searle enters Icarus I's viewing room to prepare for his death, for when Icarus II leaves, there will be no shielding from the sun. He burns to death as the Icarus I crew did. Corazon calculates how much oxygen they have and how much they need to complete the mission. She concludes there is enough for 4 of the 5 of them to live to deliver the payload. It is decided Mace will kill Trey, but when he goes to carry out the act, he finds Trey has already committed suicide. Mace very viciously smears blood on Dr. Robert's hand, blaming him for Trey's death, and again the two fight, a battle that ends quickly in the low oxygen environment of the ship. In the payload room, the android tells Dr. Robert Capa that there is still not enough oxygen for all of them to live until they deliver the payload. He says that Corazon did the math and there should be enough oxygen for all 4 surviving crew members. The AI tells him that there are 5 people on board the ship, the 5th being in the viewing room. Dr. Robert Capa races to the viewing room and discovers that Pinbacker is still alive. He is terribly burnt everywhere on his body and is clearly psychotic. He slices a wound in Dr. Robert Capa's chest with a stolen scalpel and chases him through the ship. Dr. Robert Capa makes it to the suit room and locks himself in. Pinbacker pulls the safety lever, trapping Dr. Robert Capa in the room. Pinbacker then removes the ship's computer servers from their coolant just as he did on his own ship. In the burned-out oxygen garden, Corazon finds a single seedling rapidly growing out of the newly burnt soil, giving her and the mission hope of not just survival but even returning to Earth. As she calls Dr. Robert Capa and Cassie to the room, Pinbacker kills her. Mace goes into the cooling unit to fix the Icarus II's mainframe by immersing himself in the coolant. He is caught in the machinery, his leg injured and bleeding, and he eventually freezes to death. Pinbacker also chases Cassie, who hides in the front of the ship, in the nuclear payload. Trapped in the suit room, Dr. Robert Capa talks to Mace before he dies. Mace, in agony from the freezing coolant, tells Dr. Robert Capa he'll have to manually decouple the nuclear payload from Icarus and fly it directly into the sun. Dr. Robert Capa escapes from the room by donning a suit, puncturing the inner door with a welding torch, and releasing the outer airlock door. Many of the ship's loose contents and Corazon's body fly out of the ship and Dr. Robert Capa gains access. He decouples the payload and walks to the front hatch of the ship. As the payload and Icarus II drift apart, Dr. Robert Capa uses the propulsion unit of his suit to fly to the payload. As he reaches it, the payload's thrusters fire, burning up part of Icarus II. The rest of the ship burns up and explodes. Dr. Robert Capa goes into the payload to manually pilot and ignites it. There he finds Cassie hiding and is confronted by Pinbacker. The two grapple with the psychotic Pinbacker and escape his clutches. Dr. Robert Capa manages to ignite the payload, and as the nuclear reaction begins, he finds peace, accepting his death and staring into the flames of the sun as it looms ever closer. Back on Earth, Robert Capa's sister and her children are outside in a park covered with snow as she watches the last message sent to her by Dr. Robert Capa. A brighter than the usual sun is seen finally breaking through the clouds over a frozen Sydney harbor, showing that they succeeded in their mission. And the movie ends. If you enjoyed this video, please help us by clicking the like button and subscribing for more amazing content like this. Thanks for watching.